episode number 62.
This episode is brought to you by our Career Kickstart coaching program, where we help ambitious working mums who are feeling stuck, overwhelmed, or frustrated to take the best next step in their careers. Making the right career move can be hard enough. And when you add motherhood into the mix, well, things can get really complicated. So through our program, we can help you to ditch the frustration and the overwhelm and get to a place where you are loving your work and life. So if this sounds good to you, then head over to our website at lightboxcoaching.com to find out more information. Hi, you're listening to the Careers Beyond Motherhood podcast with your host, Janine Esbrand. I'm here to help working mums like you to thrive in your careers and in motherhood. I share tips, strategies, and inspirational conversations with awesome women to help reduce the struggle in your juggle.
Time for Say Mummy.
Hello, and welcome to the show. It is great to be back with you again. How are you? I hope you are well. I am doing pretty good. So this weekend, I have been reminded about how quickly time goes and how much things change. We just celebrated my son's 4th birthday, and I know it's cliche, but I cannot believe how quickly time has passed. I can't believe he's 4. It literally feels like the other day I was bringing him home and spending emotional days wondering what in the world I was doing. Breastfeeding was hard. Looking after a brand new human was hard. Being a mum was just hard. But as time progressed and I found my feet, it did get a lot easier. And I remember around his first birthday feeling like, wow, this is actually doable. And that's when my husband and I talked about having another baby. So it clearly wasn't that bad. And so that's why we have 2. But I do think as mothers, we can give ourselves a hard time and feel like we should be doing a lot better or managing a lot better. But the truth is, whichever stage you're at in motherhood, it's new. It's new to you. As soon as you start to get a little bit comfortable, everything changes. The child changes, the children change, and there's new challenges and new ways to do things and new things to figure out. So there is no other job that would expect you to get everything right straight out of the gate consistently, especially when the job description is continually changing. How I had to parent my newborn is very different to how I parent my 4-year-old. So I just want to encourage you today that you are totally doing a good job and just to keep going. Before we jump into today's episode, I want to take a few minutes to share a review that one of our listeners recently left. I absolutely love getting reviews for the podcast because when you're sitting behind the mic and recording these episodes, I can see that people are downloading them, but I never really know what people are thinking unless they give a review. So it's awesome to get them. So if you haven't done one before, then do head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and review. It also helps people to find the podcast and tune into our conversation. So this review came from a listener called The First Key, and he writes, I am a male career coach and I needed some advice for a client of mine who was looking to return to work after taking time off to be with her new family. Janine's podcast offered fantastic advice. I wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone who is struggling with returning to work after taking time off. Thank you so much for that lovely review. I am so excited and happy that our episode was able to help your client, and I would encourage anybody else who thinks they have people who would also benefit from what we talk about on the podcast to share the podcast with others. Okay, on to today's episode. So we are talking about a topic that we don't always focus on because we here on the Careers Beyond Motherhood podcast like to provide strategies, tools, advice and tips for working mums on how they can reduce the struggle in their juggle. But today we're looking at the other side of the parenting spectrum, and we're looking at working fatherhood. And my guest today is someone who has been advocating for women's rights in the workplace and diversity for the past decade, but he has recently started sharing his perspective as a working father. He has released a book called Confessions of a Working Father, and it's really interesting to look at his perspective and to hear his perspective because not enough men do share the struggles with being working fathers, especially fathers who want to be really hands-on with their children as they grow up. So it it's a treat to hear from Brian today and to really listen to his experience and what it's been like for him to be sharing it with others. So if you are a working parent who would like to see things change in the workplace, then I really suggest that you tune into this conversation because Brian shares some great insight. So without further ado, let's jump over to my interview with Brian Ballantyne.
Hi, Brian. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to interview you today. Could you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us a bit about yourself?
Hi, Janine. It's really good to talk to you too. Hi, everyone. So my name is Brian Ballantyne. I work for a large tech company in Luxembourg. I'm married and have two children, Gabriel and Daniel, 12 and 10. And I published a book recently called Confessions of a Working Father, where I shared more of my stories about how I juggle work and parent life. So that's me. Awesome.
So there is so much that I want to dive in and ask you about. Before I do that, can you just talk a bit about what your career looks like pre-fatherhood and whether there have been any changes since having your two children and what kind of life looks like now, balancing work and family life?
Absolutely. So I've been working for about 20 years now. I did a marketing degree at Northumbria and then worked at Heinz for a year. Then I did the Vodafone graduate scheme and then worked at Vodafone for about 12 years. Now that kind of crossed into getting married and starting to have children. And then I've been working at Amazon for about 6 years now. I've mainly worked in marketing roles and product management. I followed my wife to Luxembourg when we got married and I took a commercial finance role for a while. And that was also when my children were born. And recently I've gone back into product management and then marketing, and now I work in diversity and inclusion for the company I'm at now. Yeah, it was a very big change having children for me and my wife, obviously, as well. It totally changes your perspective on how you manage your time, on someone else being dependent on you, how you work together with your partner. And I think one of the big things about having children is your relationship with the other parent, and often you bring different things to that. And so that's been quite interesting, quite hard work over the last kind of 10, 12 years with children as they've gone through kind of dependent small babies to kind of 12-year-olds with a mind of their own, getting into trouble with the police and with school and everything, and different kinds of psychological strain with that. So yeah, and then it's definitely kind of changed probably my productivity, how I see what's important in life, and how much I want to spend time doing work and spending time with my family. But it's stressful as well at the same time.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things that I really like about your work, and I've started looking at your book and looked at some of the other things that you've been blogging about online, is the fact that you're sharing this perspective. I think when it comes to working parenthood, people often just focus on the mothers and, will ask women, how are you juggling it all? But don't necessarily ask men the same question. And so I think it's brilliant that you are kind of, showing that side of it and being open and transparent about the struggles. How have you found kind of people responding to that? I'd be interested to know how women are responding to you sharing, and also men.
It's a good question. And I held back from sharing for a long time. I've been kind of champion for women's rights for about a decade at work and longer in my family and at home. And you always hear things like, men they feel like they deserve a gold medal just for basic decency. They say things like, I'm babysitting their own children. Yes. Or if they pick up the kids one day, they're like they're a hero. Or if they manage to do a bit of housework or empty the dishwasher, they want a gold medal. You're worried if you say something, you're going to get that criticism. And I think men are sometimes fragile when it comes to kind of ridicule on these things. But I felt like after 10 years of standing up for women and organising women's events and more intersectional events as well, I felt like maybe I'd earned the place to say about myself. I was always advocating for others. So it is interesting. I started sharing stories about what it's like to be a kind of working father. And it's funny because this started off from a chat I had with someone called Nadia Nagamutu. She did her kind of master's research was on groups of people where women get ahead better, not so much when they're kind of coached on leaning in and everything else, but more just when men lean in more, looking after the kids and doing the housework. It's as simple as that. Women don't need any extra special coaching. They're already brilliant as they are. So I thought, maybe I can get more men involved and help women by getting more men into the conversation. Because that's another thing as well in the whole diversity space. A lot of men feel like it's not their space to talk. When they hear gender diversity, they just think about women. But actually men and male and masculinity are a key part of gender, kind of variety and balance. So yeah, and I got some pushback, and I think I always now when I started sharing some of these stories about how it's hard as a working dad, some mums said, yeah, it's harder for women though. And I said, yeah, probably it is. And some women challenge me on that. They think it's just as hard for men. But I said, yeah, probably a lot of the times it is harder for mums. But it doesn't mean it's easy for me either.
Yeah.
And so I think as long as you acknowledge someone and say, yeah, it is probably harder for you, especially single mums. And there are a lot of single dads out there as well. And so it's not the hardest for me, but still there's probably things that we have in common. And I think that's what's been good about it, is that loads of women have been really supportive and loads of men have started to kind of come out of the woodwork. But overall, it just shows how much we have in common. And like obviously past the initial pregnancy and birth and kind of early stages, it's quite, I mean, we've got similar challenges really. It's just society that makes us feel that what's a mother's job and what's a father's job.
Yeah, I think it's so important to hear that other side. I haven't had many men on the show, but I had an interview with someone called Alan Reed, and he was sharing his experience of working fatherhood. And then I had my husband come on and talk about how the fact that he got to spend a lot of time with my daughter when she was a baby made such a difference to their bond and made such a difference to how they are now. But he wouldn't have realised that had he not been made redundant at the time that he was and had the opportunity to have that time off. So I think it's really, really great that you can, be having those open conversations. What would you say are some of like the main challenges for you as a working dad? What would you say that is?
The challenges of being a parent, which is that you have these small people, your heart on the outside, who are often dependent on you, and they want either in terms of, they want to talk to you when you're in a meeting, or they've locked themselves out of the house, or when they're smaller, they need to be collected and taken places. So there's the kind of parenting challenges. You kind of, are they doing well? Are their grades doing well? Are they healthy? Are they happy? Have they got friends? Is there anything that's going on with them? So there's a kind of common parenting things, which I think we have in common with all parents. But then there's the expectations of masculinity, and I think at work and in society. So I think it's more expected that mothers might leave earlier or not be available to travel as much. And I think that's often biased. Women aren't asked to go on kind of overseas projects because of that. But men are kind of, when I've been invited to go on work offsites and things, I've pushed back, saying, well, no, that clashes with something else. Or my wife's working or she's at a conference, and it's just not as accepted as much. And you hear some men will say about another man on parental leave, oh, he's on maternity leave, and it's kind of like emasculating or kind of feminizing in some way, which you kind of can see past that. But it's still, there is that kind of peer pressure, and it's kind of frowned upon. So you just have to kind of push past that. But it's still a kind of psychological pressure. You feel like you're compromising your career if you're not manning up, as it were. So people might scoff at that and say, well, that's not nothing compared to what women or women of colour or other people might experience on a day-to-day basis at work. But I think it still is something that men face. And I mean, there's a group in Sheffield which was set up by a man whose two of his male friends committed suicide through mental health issues. So I think it is serious. It does take a toll on men, but most men feel that it's not their place to talk about it, or it's not manly to admit any kind of weakness. So I think it is actually quite serious in some cases.
And I know that your kind of role now is diversity and inclusion. So how has some of your experience kind of impacted the way that you kind of do things now within your role within your organisation? So like the policies that you put in place or the kind of support that you offer, has your experience impacted the way you look at things?
Absolutely. So I think my experience with the family I grew up in was quite diverse. It's a kind of mixed ethnicity, religion, sexuality family that I grew up in. So diversity has always been kind of normal for me, and there's always been different voices in my family, and so that I feel uncomfortable when there's not a variety of people. So and I've also seen firsthand kind of brothers and sisters being excluded, and I can my compassion and empathy skills have developed through that, and also having strong role models in my mum and my dad, and so that's pretty that's why I care about this topic. But I think as well, it's funny, when I started about a year ago officially as part of my job title, and I've been a volunteer for about 10 years in diversity and inclusion, but some women were like, oh, we're not sure how we feel about having this white man as our diversity person. I was like, wow, that's like, well, I know 10 years experience.
Discrimination against you.
It is, yeah. But I try to take it in a positive way. It's like, that's a really good empathy experiment, because there's a lot of women that say they're PhDs in computer science, and they apply for an engineering role, and someone says, yeah, but you're a woman. It's like, what's that got to do with anything? What's my gender got to do with my competence? So I tried to kind of take it as a learning experience. But it's interesting as well, because I think a lot of what's been happening in diversity inclusion over like 25 years is that it falls on the kind of oppressed or maybe the disadvantaged groups of people to sort things out for themselves. And while I can be a champion for diversity, I don't face discrimination on a daily basis, but it doesn't mean I can't kind of champion that and fight for people who do. But I think a lot of it is, I've been in so many echo chambers over the last few years. I was at Women in Technology in Amsterdam, a room of 2,000 women being told about the importance of women in technology. And I was like, I think they get it. I think they know. You need to tell these women that, or when you have, other kind of conferences, it just feels like it's kind of an echo chamber. So, speaking out as a working father and trying to get more men involved is part of trying to engage the mainstream more. I think there's a challenge of getting straight white men to diversity events because they don't think it's their problem. But I challenge them and say that it is their problem. And it's just something that we can all fight for. So I'm trying to support more on kind of mainstream things, like not just who's on the stage for a diversity conference, but who's on the stage for the main conference, who's getting the main promotions, the main awards, just doing diversity and just poking it and just checking there's balances on the on the main stage.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I think what you said is right, when it's kind of preaching to the choir when we're talking to people that are already on board. We need to be talking to those who need to get on board. And so it's great that you're taking that approach. And have you found that publishing your book has helped with that? And you could talk a bit about the book if you want.
Yes, it sounds very grand publishing a book. Basically, I blogged for a couple of months on LinkedIn with stories. The stories I've been telling, over the last year, I was invited to go to some of our offices in Virginia, in Madrid, Berlin, Luxembourg, London, and talk about, this idea of male allyship, which I don't really agree with the word, but how men can care more about this and get more involved, particularly in engineering and tech, where women are definitely a minority. And I know people started saying, well, why do you care about it? And so I just started telling stories from my family, stories about my mum, stories about my grandparents, stories about, things that have shaped who I am. So the blogging is kind of telling some of those stories, which kind of really stood out on LinkedIn because there's so much people selling stuff. So, but if you start telling a heartfelt story, and then mix it in with things like, working from home and doing the laundry, or parenting from work, you're at work, but you're still a parent. Yeah, so just kind of mixing all that in. So I think that's the book's just a kind of collection of those. And I did another book called Working Together, The Joy of Teams, which is just more about inclusion, but also just thinking about the teams that we're in. And it's really fun to be in teams. And so I think that's been good because it's broadened the conversation, and it's got more men kind of speaking up. Sometimes they don't agree with it, or after International Women's Day, someone said to me it's not enough that you're a man who helps. You need to get other men involved. And I really don't feel comfortable doing that, but I thought fair enough, I'll do that. So I did a few posts about tips for men, and one of them got 150,000 views, 1,500 likes. And it was like quite controversial. I said, like, men in meetings count the number of women, like notice how often they speak and they're interrupted, and here's some things you can do. And like, it was mainly positive, but like people got really offended by that. A lot of men were like, that's so sexist, that's patronizing women. And I was like, you know what? I'll take it. I'll take being called sexist if this helps one woman have a better experience. So it's like, fine, call me sexist, but it's like, it's kind of controversial. But I think that's the thing. A lot of men feel it is sexist and patronizing. A lot of women say it's patronizing. I don't need someone to stick up for me. But there needs a certain amount of emotional intelligence to do it in the right way. Yeah.
And I think whenever you're standing up for something, you're always going to get those people that have an opposing view. But then I see it as you're definitely doing something right, because if you're towing the line, then normally nobody has anything to say. And so I think that's brilliant. And even those people that are pushing back, I'm sure whatever you said is something that stuck with them. So the fact that it's got that much traction on LinkedIn means that so many people have seen it. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. And I think like the opposite of agreement isn't disagreement, it's indifference. And I think it's like the opposite of love isn't hate, it's indifference. I mean, I'd rather someone cared enough to disagree than they just didn't even care at all. So it's not always easy to have those conversations, but that's the kind of coalface of where change happens. When, as you say, someone might have that one conversation, or I've definitely thought about that, and I'm kind of open to learning, and I get it wrong, and I'm open to kind of get different points of view. So yeah, it's not, you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable in a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of it is kind of raising awareness as to what's possible and ways to do things differently. A lot of the work that I do with my clients when I work with them around figuring out how they want to craft their careers beyond motherhood starts off with them recognizing that the belief set that they had, or the mindset that they had around things doesn't necessarily have to be that way, and there's a different way to look at things, and there's a different way to approach things. And once you challenge the mindset, then from there you can see change and different way to work. So
yeah, totally.
So one of the things that I love for my guests to share are inspirational quotes or any sayings that they like that they share with others. Do you have one or two that you'd like to share?
Yeah, sure. One quote I like, and it's kind of my handle on Twitter and at work actually, is a David Hume quote. He was a Scottish philosopher from 100 years ago or so. And he said, "The head seeks what the heart desires." And I like that because a lot of people talk about the head and the heart being kind of opposed. But when you think about them kind of working together, like the head seeks what the heart desires, and it kind of fits more with kind of how I see things. I think we're all human and we all care about things from an emotional place. And it's not always about the head's rational and the heart's emotional. I think they kind of work together. So I kind of like that. Kind of backs up as me as quite an emotional kind of man who cares about things. Actually, it's a position of strength sometimes. It gets into kind of all the Brene Brown kind of daring greatly kind of strength and vulnerability stuff, which I love. And I love her "It's not the critic who counts" quotes, which comes from the Ted Roosevelt speech. That's kind of like my mantra. When I'm getting criticism on LinkedIn, I always think it's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or the doer of deeds could have done them better. It's the person in the arena. So I love that, and I love the rhythm of that, and that kind of gets me back on track. And it's like it's really easy to kind of criticize someone who's there, who's trying to make a change, and to kind of poke at that. But if you're not making change and you're not pushing for things, I don't want to hear it. Like, come and see how hard it is, and come and join me in the struggle. And it's very easy to kind of throw tomatoes from the cheap seats. So that's another quote. Another quote I like is just about this popped in my head about management. I mean, one of my favorite quotes about being a manager is the job of a manager is not to eradicate or reduce the natural enthusiasm people bring to their jobs. And I think there's some great managers out there, but there's a lot of managers who feel like they really need to kind of micromanage and push and coerce people to do stuff. But I think a lot of people just are kind of hardworking and conscientious and have got a lot of enthusiasm, and just don't crush those people. Just free them and let them. That whole leading, is it servant leadership or leading from behind kind of approach. So I don't know, it's kind of random quote, but that was just one that was top of mind for me. I love kind of quotes and stuff.
I love it. Like, you're totally speaking my language. I'm like, yes, I love Brene Brown. Yes, I love that. So it's brilliant. So what are some things that you're either reading right now or you're loving right now that you could share as well? So you mentioned Brene Brown. Are there any other authors that you're looking at the moment or reading any of their stuff?
Yeah, so no, I just received a book. Someone sent me a book yesterday, actually, Teresa Bowe, about a book which is about kind of closing the gap on inclusion. There's her kind of tribe methodology, so a big shout out to her. I've got into this book club. Someone encouraged me to go as a man, like I'm a token man and a lot of stuff now. It's called The Time Has Come by Michael Kaufman. He's been pushing for men to get involved in gender equality. I think he's been doing it since the 70s. So I'm reading that because I've got to go and do this book club about that. I'm reading a lot. I'm doing this Open University course on reading English literature. I've been reading a lot of kind of literature from things like Othello, which is pretty interesting, like kind of race and gender, through to Sam Selvon, The Lonely Londoners, talking about people from Trinidad and Jamaica coming to London, and James Berry and the Harlem Renaissance, people like Claude McKay and Langston Hughes looking at poetry from the 1920s in New York, from Harlem, and James Joyce Dubliners. I've got Ulysses, which is like a bigger book to read, but I like to read men and women authors. I've just got The Power. I think it's by Naomi someone, but someone recommended that to me. It's like a role reversal in society where it's the matriarchy. All the women have the power and the men don't. So I haven't started that one yet, but I'm looking forward to reading that one. So those are some of the books I'm reading at the moment. I'm halfway through T.H. Lawrence's Woman in Love, just as like an English literature book. But it's really, really good writing style. Anyways, I read a lot of stuff. I love reading.
Awesome. Oh my gosh. So much good stuff in there. So we're going to link to what you mentioned in the show notes, and also your book and some of the other things you mentioned, because there's so much gold for people to go away and kind of dive into more. Mm-hmm. If people want to find out more about what you're doing and connect with you, where's the best place for them?
So probably LinkedIn's a great place. I'm on there a lot. So people feel free to just kind of connect, say hello on there, send me a message. I guess I'm on Twitter, not so much. Facebook's, I guess, more personal. But yeah, if you get to contact with LinkedIn, and then, I'm always happy to kind of chat with people. And I generally reply to most things unless I get too many. But feel free to get in touch. And like I said before, even if you disagree with some of the stuff I'm saying, I'd rather have the conversation But yeah, I'm always happy to connect with people.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure my audience is going to agree. Be nodding their heads to everything that you've been saying. So yeah, it's been awesome having you on the show. So thank you for sharing with us today, Brian.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Janine.
Wasn't that a great conversation? I love what Brian had to say, particularly about the echo chamber. I think that it is great that there are so many people having conversations about gender equality and improving women's rights within the workplace. But a lot of those conversations happen in groups of people that already agree that there needs to be a change. And so that kind of view that that's an echo chamber, I understand totally, because if we are preaching to the choir, then we are not necessarily moving forward as quickly as we could if we were to focus on getting those people who are in positions of authority and in positions where they can make a change to tune into the conversation. So I love that Brian is stepping out and putting himself in sometimes uncomfortable positions so that he can champion these conversations and quality in front of the people who can make a difference. So it is, great to have that perspective, and that's really got me thinking. So if you want to learn more about Brian and his work, I will be putting the link to his LinkedIn profile and his book in the show notes. So head over to lightboxcoaching.com/episode 62 and you can grab the show notes. And while you're there, have a look around because we have a brand spanking new website. I am so happy with the work that my designer has done. His name is Jason and he's from Savvy Hippo is the website, and I love his work. It's just been amazing working with him, and I have to give him a shout out because the whole process has been seamless. He has just done such a great job at making it a painless exercise, and revamping a website and doing a rebrand is not easy. So I'm really happy as to how it's come out. So do let me know, head over, let me know your thoughts, drop me a line at janine@lightboxcoaching.com. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And throughout this whole rebrand process, I took some time to think through the process that I take my individual clients through to gain clarity around the best next step for them in their careers. And I've come up with the Career Kickstart Guide, which is a short guide that you can go through if you are at a crossroads and you're wondering what's next for you and what you should do next and how you figure out what the next step is. This guide is really going to help you to do that. So you can get that on the website at lightboxcoaching.com/kickstart and start figuring out what the next best step is for you. Okay, that's all from me today. I've shared lots with you and it's been awesome. I look forward to speaking to you again next time. And in the meantime, look after you and look after your babies. This podcast features music from Ben Sound.